For well over 4,000 years in Ireland, the blacksmith has been using the heat of the fire in his forge to bend metal to the desired shape. It used to be that every town and village had, at the very least, one forge and a blacksmith. Often there were many operating in a local area, and none more so than in Skehana, a small rural community in northeast Galway. In a bid to find out more about the history of one of the well-known blacksmiths who operated in the Skehana area, I sat down with TJ Scanlon, who lives in the townland of Bala near Menla and has a very interesting story to tell.
My great-grandfather then, Patrick McDonaghs, he was buried up in Menla in 1904. So he'd have been a blacksmith, and there was one before that. That was born in 1800, and the father of the people that immigrated to where we were talking about there. My grandfather's brother William, immigrated to England, presumably Huddersfield, and he worked there for a few years, and he sent home the money to build the forge that's over there on top of the hill. Now, before that, the old house, was down the hollow beside Byron's, and the forge was there too. But they built a new forge up on top of the hill, as we call it, and the landlord gave them the site to build it. That would be Brown down there in Carnacraig. And added to that, he sent my grandfather to Dublin for something like 6 weeks, or I don't know, some short period enough, to practice and learn as much as he could in some smithing business in Dublin. And he came back home, and he was a good smith, from what you would hear. I never knew the man because he died before I was born. But William immigrated to Boston shortly after, he came back from England, he immigrated over to Boston. And my grandfather's, that was one brother, and my grandfather's other brother was Johnny, and he immigrated to Boston as well. Both of them worked there, and William had a forge in Boston. And both of them worked. Now, whether they were effectively working for somebody else, smithies, they were showing the horses for the I think it's the postal service or whatever. It was all horses that time. There was pulling the loads anyway. And they'd be quitted in the evening and coming home. And William, and on occasion, would take off a little bit ahead of Johnny, and he'd knock at somebody that would be very easily annoyed if they didn't like the individual, or if you were trying to walk ahead, and he'd knock at the door of somebody, and he'd have it timed in such a way the door would be just open when Johnny was passing. And did you knock at the door, and that sort of thing. That type of character now, he was funny. But Johnny came back to Ireland sometime after in the middle of the war, around that period of time. And the forge at that stage was idle, so he took over the running of the forge, and he ran it until, I'd say, the 60s, into the 60s anyway.
What kind of work were they doing within the forge for people around the place?
Oh, well, they'd be showing horses, naturally enough, making the shoes and fitting them and all of that type of thing. They would be also making socks for the ploughs. You'd have to do that, so they were able to turn those out. And there were another item they were making would be grubbers, as they call them, for tilling along the drills of potatoes. This was a machine, if we want to call it that, with 1, 2, 3 little scoops of things that went down into the earth, and there was a frame holding them together, and you had 2 handles at the back of it, and the horse was out in front pulling it. And there was a little wheel on the very front that floated along over the soil, so it didn't actually go down into the very bottom of the earth there, like. That kept it at a level, that you could work on. You could raise the handles and balance it with the wheel, and you'd let it down a bit more if you thought you wanted to dig a bit more, or pull it up if you thought it was going too far. So that was the grubber, as they called it. And they made them. There's some bits and pieces of those to be seen round the place all the time. Now, I don't know if my grandfather did a lot of that. Some people did a lot of that type of thing. I'm not sure if he did, and I cannot say that he didn't either. He purchased a very large, at the time, a very large drilling machine, hand operated, that stood, when it was up in place, something like 6 foot high, and it had a very large wheel up at the top to give it a bit of impetus in twisting it. Once you got the wheel turning, the thing would go through naturally enough without putting a lot of pressure on you. That was the idea of the large wheel. Once you got it spinning, and it had a feeding mechanism that induced the bits to go through the steel or iron or whatever you want to call it on board. So he bought one of those, and that was unique for the period we're talking about, because there certainly wouldn't be anything of the nature in the country. And I don't think he did an awful lot with it. I thought that now, but maybe I'm wrong. But he did have that, and he obviously saw something like that when he spent his 6 weeks in Dublin or whatever.
But he would have done a lot of work for the local landlord who had sent him off in this original course.
Oh yes, Brown obviously came up and gave him all his work, whatever it was. And I remember coming up to the 20s, I suppose. I remember hearing this, I don't remember, but the cattle driving experience, you know what I'm talking about, and that, where people were trying to get rid of the landlords and they were pulling their cattle out on the road and all the rest of it. And even though Brown had provided him with the site for the forge, he gave some cutting equipment to remove the locks off the landlord's gate. Now, you wouldn't have too far to go if you were examining the thing to understand that what cut the lock must have been from a specialist place, and the blacksmith would come into question in that end of it. But I remember hearing that the landlord got a bit annoyed with Pat McDonaghs at some stage or other, and he wasn't altogether responding as he should, it seemed, in whatever he was doing. And he actually hit him with his, I don't know, the whip or whatever he had. And that was unusual. But maybe it was after that he supplied the machinery to cut the locks. I don't know. There we are. That's how it happened.
As you reflect on it now, and with all the knowledge that you hold yourself from your family connection, what do you think are your lasting thoughts on the contribution that your grandfather made to the history of this community?
I didn't look at it that way, but they did an awful lot of work, and it mightn't always be paid per se, but if they weren't paid by cash, the individual would come and give them a hand making the hay or the turf or whatever. So there was lots of ways of contributing to the men's funds without actually parting with cash. I'm not saying that he worked for everyone for nothing, or that couldn't happen, but it was part of what they did at the time, and that was understood in the way things worked. But it was a way of keeping society moving, if you like, keep it functional, and you had something there that shod the horses and kept them going, and they wouldn't be looking for twice their wages, if you want to look at it that way. I'd say there was a limited amount they could get for what they were doing, and they certainly weren't adding on any more than was necessary. So I think they contributed in a great way.